It would not be possible for me to tell you how thankful I am to be able to come today to share with you in this service. Thank you for inviting me, and let me thank all of you for being here this morning. I've come all the way here today to tell you three things, and I mean them from the bottom of my heart. First of all, I want you to know that God loves you. You know, sometimes when you go through difficult experiences in life, you're prone to say with the psalmist, "Has God forgotten to be gracious to me?" But I want to assure you today that there is nothing in the world that will ever separate you from the love of God. The second thing I want to say to you today is, I love you. I love you very much. I loved you when I was your pastor, and you loved me. I told you frequently. I don't think very many Sunday mornings passed by when I preached here for 22 years. Very few Sunday mornings passed by that I did not stand in this pulpit and tell you that I loved you. And you knew that because I ministered to you, and you supported me, and you encouraged me when I was your pastor. The third thing I want to say to you today is that I'm praying for you. Gail and I have our devotion every morning at 7 o'clock, unless I have a reason that I have to be away from home earlier than that in the morning. But we have our devotion time every Sunday morning at 7 o'clock. And she and I have been praying for you, and we're going to continue to pray for you. Before I bring my message this morning, I want to ask you if you will bow your head with me and let me ask God's blessings on the service today. Heavenly Father, your word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. Your word is the authority for our preaching, and your word is the authority for our everyday living. So as I come to share a message with a group of people that I love with all of my heart, I pray very sincerely that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts will be pleasing and acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and our Redeemer. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm sure that just about everyone here today is familiar with the name Aesop. Aesop was a Greek slave and a Greek storyteller who lived about 600 years before the time of Jesus. Aesop told a number of very interesting stories to illustrate human faults and human virtues. The encyclopedia says that Aesop's most famous and most familiar story is the story of the goose that laid the golden egg. And that may be true. It's a very good story, and I love it. But my favorite story that Aesop told, which are called his fables, Aesop's fable, my favorite one is the story of the father who had 7 sons. And they were always arguing with one another and struggling with one another. And one day he called all of his sons in to meet with him. And as he met with them, he had a bundle of sticks. and they were tied together with a cord very tightly. And he placed these sticks in the hands of each one of his sons, beginning with the oldest son. And he said to his sons, I want you to try to break these sticks that are bundled together. Each one of the sons took the sticks, and with all of the might that each one had, tried to break the sticks, and not one of them was able to break the sticks. Then he took the sticks and he untied the cord, and he took one stick at a time for each one of the sons. And he said to the sons, now see if you could break the stick. And when each one of the sons took the sticks, he was able to break the son very easily. And the father looked at all 7 of his sons, and he said to his sons, my sons, you see the power of unity. If you will keep yourselves joined together in the bonds of brotherly affection, there is no power that any mortal has will ever be able to hurt you. But once the ties of brotherly affection are broken, you are liable to be abused by every injured hand that would assault you. What a story. What a lesson. It applies to your home. It applies to your business. It applies to your school. And it also applies to your good church. The church at Corinth, about which the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, had division in the church. They were always arguing about something. There were all kinds of issues in the early church at Corinth. And Paul wrote 2 letters called 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians to deal with the issues and the problems that the Corinthian church was facing. And in chapter 3, verse 9, he gave a verse to call the members of the church at Corinth to pull together. And that is the title of my message today, A Call to Pull Together. And this is what he said in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 9. We are laborers together with God. We are God's field. We are God's building. Now, 3 things that I want to call to your attention today. First of all, he says, we are workers. He's talking about the work in the kingdom of God. He is talking about our service in the church. Now, the work that we do in the kingdom of God, the service that we offer in the church, our work is very sacred. It is sacred because it is God's work, and since it is sacred, we ought to remember to do our work in the church, our work in the kingdom of God, very carefully, thoroughly, faithfully, and well. Our work is not only sacred, our work is very urgent. By that I mean that our life on earth is very brief. It is going to pass by a lot quicker than most of us realize. And because our lives are brief and because There are so many people in the world who have never heard the gospel, and many who have heard the gospel and have never responded to the gospel. Our work is very urgent. Jesus spoke about this in the 9th chapter of the Gospel of John in verse 4. He said, "We must work the works of him that sent us while it is day. For the night comes when no one will be able to work." Now, in the book of Romans in chapter 12, from which Joe read this morning, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Ephesians chapter 4, verses 10 and 11 and 12, Paul gave a list of spiritual gifts. And every Christian has at least one spiritual gift. Some have more than one, but God distributed these gifts in the church. We call them the gifts of the Spirit. And he distributed these in the church so that we could minister to people in the church, that we could teach people in the church to be good disciples, and so that we could build up the church. And it's very important that every member of the church find a place somehow to be of service in the kingdom of God and be of service in the church. I read a cute story a few years ago about a professor whose name was Professor Little. Professor Little lived in a little house on Little Street in a little town. He taught in a little college for a little salary. And he and Ms. Little had 6 little littles. And one day a man came to him and said, "Professor Little, how on earth do you make it in life?" He said, "You live in a little house on Little Street in a little town. You teach in a little college. You teach for a little salary, and you and Ms. Little have 6 littles. How in the world do you do it?" He said, "It's very easy. Every little helps a little." Now, the strength of a good church is a church where every member finds a place of service and he faithfully serves the Lord through the ministry of the church. The second thing I want to say today is we are laborers, we are workers together. The word together to me is a wonderful word. I just have a good feeling when I hear the word together. It's a good word for the church. It's a proper word for the church. When you use the word together, it brings to mind a group of people who are cooperating with one another to achieve a goal or to accomplish a determined task. The word together calls to my mind a group of people who see what they're doing as a unit. It brings to my mind teamwork, where members of the team are supporting one another and members of the team are encouraging one another. It reminds me of a team where the members of the team are supplementing each other and complementing each other. Last year, going back to June, and this year coming through March, our state had something wonderful to happen in the sports world. It's something that I don't believe any other state has ever had to happen. I Googled it, and the article that I read confirms what I am saying, that never happened in another state. Last June, the Chanticleers of Coastal Carolina won the College World Series in baseball, and they became national champions. It was a surprise for most people in the sports world. Then in January, the Tigers of Clemson University won a football national championship. Then in March, the Lady Gamecocks won a national championship in basketball, and the men's team went all the way to the Final Four. Gail and I, along with our children, watched all of those games, and we pulled for all of our state teams to see to it that they were successful. And we stayed up late at night to be sure that we were able to hear what the coaches had to say about their good teams and how they were so successful in what they did. And I was amazed. One of our coaches said, "We give God all the glory." Another one stood before national television and said, "The Lord helped us do this." But the thing that I want to emphasize to you this morning is what all three coaches said in one way or another. They said, all season our teams have been together. We have played together as a family. We have determined that we were going to support each other and play together. Now, if it can happen on a college campus with a ball team, it looks to me like that a church, which is the body of Christ, the bride of Christ, the building of God, that God's people would pull together and work together to be sure that the good news of the gospel gets out to all of the world. Thirdly, we're not only workers. We're not only workers together, but thirdly, we are workers together with God. You see, when I stand before a congregation and recognize all that needs to be done, when I serve in the church and realize all of the challenges that we face in the church and all that needs to be done, I'll be real honest with you. I've been in the ministry a long time, but I feel so inadequate. And when I think about what needs to be done, I not only feel inadequate, I realize that the gifts that I have are not strong enough to do the work. But what keeps me going and keeps me from getting so discouraged that I cannot do my work, I realize that I do not do what I do in my own strength. I do not do what I do in my own power. I am able to take my feeble hands and my mind, which lacks a lot of wisdom, I'm able to reach up and grab the hands of God. And I am able to claim His promises. Paul said in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me my strength. And Jesus said in Matthew chapter 19, verse 26, He said, with men, these things seem impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Then almost daily I'm able to claim the promise that the Apostle Paul gave in Romans 8:28. We know that God works with us in all things for those who love the Lord. Now I want to say three things to you from my heart today as I bring my message to a close. Listen to me carefully. First of all, be pleasant and be polite with one another. I was raised in a home where there were 6 children. We were all close together. The oldest child was a girl and the youngest child was a girl. In between, 4 boys. And if a mother ever deserved a place in heaven, my mother did. The 4 of us boys were close. But if you have brothers and sisters, you understand what I'm talking about. There were times when we got on each other's nerves, and times when we said things to each other that we later learned to regret in life. My mother's favorite saying was this: boys, if you can't say something nice about each other, just don't say anything at all. And now, out of a heart with love this morning, I'm going to say to you, if you can't say something nice about your fellow church member and your fellow Christian, then just don't say anything at all. One of my mother's favorite verses was Ephesians 4:32. Be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. Secondly, first of all, I have said, be pleasant and be polite. Number 2, be patient and be positive. When I was your pastor, people were so good to me to give me words of advice and words of encouragement, to come and sit down in the office and even come to my home and sit and talk with me and encourage me about my ministry, and I loved it. I had a special relationship with one person in the church and in the city. One morning, he and I were eating breakfast together, and we were close, but I never talked with him about any personal problems in the church. Never. And he never talked with me about any problems at Bruce Hospital. But one morning, we were eating breakfast, and he said to me, just in a casual conversation, he said, Jimmy, when I was growing up, there was a man in Savannah that was a singer. His name was Johnny Mercer. And he said he had a little tune that became a kind of a philosophy of life for me. And he said, this is what it says: you've got to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, latch on to the affirmative, but don't mess with Mr. In-Between. You need to look for what is good in the other person's life, and maybe allow those 4 fingers to point back at you and to see what is not good in your own life. But think only the best of the other members, and it will have a decided effect on the membership of this church. Thirdly, be persistent in prayer. Jesus said that people should always pray and not faint. The writer of the book of James said, the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous person avails much. And 2 weeks ago, Gail and I were concluding our devotion. And she looked at me and she said, you know, there's a verse that if First Baptist Church would adopt it and live by it every day, it would have a decided effect on the ministry of that good church. 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. If my people, which are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their sinful ways, then will I hear from heaven. I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land. Now I believe with all of my heart that if you would listen to nothing that I said in my message today except those last three things I'm going to tell you, you would see a turnaround in this good church. And I know you know me well enough today to know that my message comes from God, but it also comes from my heart. I'm going to stand down here, and I don't want anyone to, I don't mind your coming, but I don't want you to feel you have to come and say anything to me. But if you're a member of this church, I just wonder if you would be willing to come. I'm going to come, and I'm coming for myself about this church. Would you be willing just to come around this altar, stop long enough to say, God, help me to be pleasant. God, help me to be positive. God, help me to be prayerful. Our hymn of invitation is such a beautiful hymn. Have thine own way, Lord. I can't tell you how many times as a child I heard it, and how many times I walked the aisle in the church for rededication. Have thine own way, Lord. Hymn number 544. Thank you for listening to me today.